If there is one thing that this unique year of 2020 has shown us all, is that we all live in an ever more volatile, unpredictable, complex, and an ever more ambiguous world. When it comes to international security, nuclear weapons remain an ever-growing existential threat to the humankind. How can we avoid future nuclear crises? Through smart arms control negotiations and international diplomacy. We're about to kickstart an online conference on international security system and resumption of the global nuclear dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome. 75 years ago, the United States dropped 2 nuclear devices on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, almost instantaneously killing 200,000 Japanese civilians. The devastating results of these acts horrified the world, yet never stopped it from arms proliferation. Now the 9 nuclear powers possess 14,000 atomic weapons. 90% of the total nuclear stockpile are controlled by the United States and Russia. The new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty that controls how much each of these superpowers can have of the nuclear weapons, the amount of the nuclear weapons. This treaty will end in February 2021, and the current US's hesitance to prolong and to renew the treaty is adding the tension in the air. Amid the disruptions in the ongoing efforts to engage Iran to guarantee the peaceful use of its nuclear technologies, as well as North Korea's continued refusal to comply with the relevant UN Security resolutions, Security Council resolutions. The continued proliferations and modernization of atomic weapons are increasing the risk of eventual deliberate or accidental use. Now, with the advancements in science, in technology, the technological barriers to nuclear entry are much lower, and this increases not only the entrance, the fact that more countries will cross the nuclear threshold, but also non-state actors acquiring the devastating weapons. International cooperation and assistance will be key in strengthening international security, and that is why tonight top experts, authorities and leaders will come together to discuss ways of promoting peace without nuclear weapons. Our conference will comprise of 2 major sessions titled A World Without Order, How Can We Restore the International Security System? And the second session, 100 Seconds Before Midnight, Strategic Timing for Resumption of Nuclear Dialogue. By the end of the conference, we hope that a call, an appeal for world leaders on the creation of a global alliance of leaders for nuclear security and a nuclear weapon-free world will be adopted. As a treat, by the end of the conference, we will have a book presentation by Mr. Rupert Goodman, a book dedicated to the first Kazakh president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, titled Father of the Nation, Man of Peace, a Record of Leadership. For the opening remarks, I would like to give the floor to the director of the World Economics and Politics Institute, Mr. Yerzhan Saltybayev, who has made this conference possible despite the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Saltybayev, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your kind introduction. It's indeed a great pleasure for me, to my colleagues, that we are organizing this online conference on international security system and resumption of global nuclear dialogue. As you might know, the foundation, Nursultan Nazarbayev Foundation, and the Institute of World Economics and Politics, which is operating under the auspices of this foundation, play an active role in organizing such a flagship event for the foundation as Astana Club. So during the 5th session of the Astana Club last year, the first president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev, proposed a new initiative, which is our creation of a global alliance of leaders for nuclear security and nuclear weapon-free world. So the idea, during this year, we worked hard to despite all the constraints of the pandemic, we have actively negotiated and consulted with many prominent politicians, experts, scientists, leaders around the globe, how to make this initiative possible and make it real. So many speakers of today's online conference made valuable suggestions and contributions on this matter, and we have made every effort to take into account all of their contributions. Thus, thanks to active international support from our colleagues, from the members of the Consultative Council of the Astana Club, and many others, we are trying to take the first serious practical step in this direction, and this conference is indeed this first practical step in the creation of this global alliance. Dear colleagues, just a few words about the content of this conference and why it is important today to discuss all of these issues and challenges that our world is facing today. So today, in our view, we are meeting with very important we are doing very important and timely event in view of all the challenges that are taking place in the world. We must admit that international security system, and in particular global security system, has entered in the new phase of crisis development. That is why the international community needs a positive agenda on nuclear security and nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Many public, international, global and regional initiatives need to be, if you will, consolidated, and we need a single, united, powerful voice, international voice that will promote international cooperation in the field of nuclear security and disarmament. Our alliance, Global Alliance of Leaders, in our view is a unique platform that could bring together the most prominent politicians and experts in the field of nuclear security. The compelling advantage of the alliance is that it unites both politicians, diplomats, as well as leading experts and scientists from around the world. And many of them are presented today in our conference. This, in my opinion, guarantees the objectivity and integrity of our activities as alliance. These are the attributes that are required in today's very polarized and very divided world. I strongly believe that our activities will allow us, in the end, effectively unite international activists around these very important and timely agenda. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nazarbayev. Next, I'd like to give the floor to the head of the international programs at the Nursultan Nazarbayev Foundation, Mr. Khairat Abusitov. Mr. Abusitov, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor, because first of all, I would like just to express my deep appreciation to all members of Astana Club Consultative Council and to all leading experts who are participating in this particular online conference. My thinking is that it's absolutely, I totally agree with previous speakers that this is timely, very timely event, because these two options and these two sessions, it comes as a result of the analytic work, as a result of the last Astana Club forum. Because these two sessions devoted to very important issues concerning the international security system, and the second one, this is a non-proliferation, nuclear disarmament, and what we have to do in order to gain the promises of the gaining the nuclear weapons-free world. In my understanding, and with Mr. Granov, so we discussed this issue within the framework of the last Astana Club and many times, and I'm proceeding from the understanding. First of all, from the indivisibility of security. That's why so we put these two sessions in one basket. From one side, this is an international security system. From another side, this is the nuclear weapons issues. In my understanding that we have a great losses and that we have a big step behind, step back in these two directions, because we maybe in many cases artificially withdraw the issues of nuclear weapons disarmament, nuclear weapons non-proliferation from the whole agenda of the international security discussions. And that's why, so because we lose the opportunity to use all dimensions, I mean the human dimension, economic dimension, as well as wealth, as political, as a military political dimension in one direction. And I think that today we'll try to find a way how to coincide the international security within the framework of the nuclear weapons disarmament. This is one of very important direction and one very important options. We will be very helpful, and we are looking very, very attentively for the result of this our online conference, because it will be a good homework subject for our homework exercises in order to be prepared to the next Astana Club meeting. The second one, and because I'm saying about the open call, which will be one of very important element of our session, it's absolutely very important thing that in this document we'll try to put in one basket nuclear security, non-proliferation, and nuclear disarmament. That's why so we're trying to pull to try to, if I may say so, to widespread our efforts in order to gain our main goals. And I would like to express our deep appreciation to all members of the Astana Club consultative group who contributed a lot to this particular document. And we finalized the language, if I may say so, something like 3 days ago. Yes, 3 days ago, the language of this document was we have finalized, and we are very happy on this. And what we are looking within the second session, I would like just to ask the speakers and who would like to take the floor, just maybe to share with your views, to share with your ideas, what we have to do in future in order to establish such kind of mechanism, to institutionalize global alliance, and what we have to do in future in order to do and to accommodate everything what we are looking to do within the framework of the Global Alliance Leader Initiative or first President Nursultan Nazarbayev. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busitov, and this is a beautiful segue for our next speech. Now we would like to hear from the president of the Global Security Institute, Mr. Jonathan Granov, who is joining us from Pennsylvania, the United States, I believe. Mr. Granov, good morning.
First, let me express my gratitude and admiration to the Astana Club for this first convening of the Global Alliance of Leaders and Visionary Leadership of the first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, in his advocacy for a safer, saner, nuclear weapons-free world. His manifesto for the 21st century, which he presented at the Security Council of the United Nations, calling for nuclear disarmament and ending excessive militarism, ends with words appropriate for today and every day, an appropriate way to begin. We need to do our utmost to free humanity from the threat of deadly wars forever. There is no more important goal. And of course, a war with nuclear weapons would not only end nations, it could end the very venture of humanity. And thus, the overarching principle that every nation in the world has to affirm now, a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. But where are we today with the over 13,000 nuclear weapons in the world? The nations with the weapons are either modernizing and or expanding their arsenals. And in failure to live up to their commitment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to lower the salience and political value of nuclear weapons, they're increasing the likelihood of use. And let me give a harrowing example of that and just quote from one nation, my nation, the United States. The Joint Chiefs of Staff of the US military in publication 3-72 of June 11, 2019 stated, integration of nuclear weapons into a theater of operations requires the consideration of multiple variables. Using nuclear weapons could create conditions for decisive results and the restoration of strategic stability. Specifically, the use of a nuclear weapon will fundamentally change the scope of a battle and create conditions that affect how commanders will prevail in a conflict. Prevail in a conflict means winning by using nuclear weapons. Such an aspiration is certain to stimulate a new, immeasurably dangerous and expensive global nuclear arms race. The most reasonable response to this articulated madness is that such a policy is based on mythical thinking, and such dreaming could lead to a global nightmare. It must be stopped. I believe that if the public really understood what the use of nuclear weapons will do, the level of threat under which the people of the world live daily, the outrageous downward spiral in thinking and behavior of the nations with nuclear weapons, it would demand change for the better. The 9 nations with the weapons appear to have no plans to fulfill legal, practical, and moral obligations to eliminate these weapons. Presently, they pursue security based on the belief that by threatening to annihilate humanity, they safeguard humanity. Presently, they pursue both strategic stability and military advantage at the same time. Presently, they are not negotiating in good faith or any kind of faith a roadmap to nuclear disarmament. That is why this initiative is so critically important at this time. There must be a rudder of leadership in the world that goes in the direction of changing from this horrific paradigm based on mythical thinking to a planetary realism, a realism based on human security. If the nations with the most power decide to cooperate to realistically address the real threats to a sustainable future, global health, healthy oceans, elimination of gross poverty, enough clean water and topsoil, and ending the destruction of other species. If they decide realistically that the existential threat posed by climate change compels a less militaristic, myopically nationalistic centered approach to security in favor of realistic human security, a cascade of benefits would fall and bless humanity. There was a time in the 1980s when the world was similarly at a logjam, a critical juncture. And at that time, a 6-nation initiative emerged to jumpstart talks between the USSR, the Soviet Union, and the United States. It was led by the heads of state of Argentina, India, Mexico, Tanzania, Sweden, and Greece, non-nuclear weapon states at the time. And this 6-nation peace initiative was convened by a civil society initiative, Parliamentarians for Global Action. It effectively advanced the value of direct talks with the premise that nuclear weapons pose a threat to every human, and thus nations without the weapons have a right and duty to press for their elimination, as do citizens of the world. I envision that our leaders group could play a similar function in today's world, stimulating heads of state, especially amongst the 115 nations in nuclear weapons-free zones, and those supporting the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and those states that are non-nuclear weapon states under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to speak up and advocate. And on our own, our global leaders network, we have sufficient credibility to send delegations to Moscow and Washington to advocate. And I believe that our call that we'll be issuing today is a absolutely clear, simple framework to do that. It rests on the existing legal commitment under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the very simple principle that I began my presentation with: a nuclear war can never be won and must never be fought. And the only protection from that happening is the elimination of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grano, for important and inspirational remarks. And we will start our first session, live online debates, a world without order. How can we restore the international security system? Mr. James Lindsay, Senior Vice President of the Council of Foreign Relations and a leading authority on the U.S. foreign policy, will chair this session. Mr. Lindsay, good morning. We're waiting for Mr. Lindsay to restore his connection. He was just with us, and there seems to be another technical delay. We will start our session in a moment, and just before, perhaps any more ideas, Mr.
First of all, maybe so if we have some 2-3 minutes before.
Absolutely. Mr. Abusitov would like.
I totally agree with Mr. Granov, so because it's with the correct understanding, the cornerstone of the initiative of the of ElBaradei, of our first president Nursultan Nazarbayev, on the establishing such kind of new mechanism of the global alliance of leaders. Because we are out of the position to say that this initiative or such kind of mechanism, maybe so, it needs to be established in order to accommodate the process of official negotiations and official discussions on the issues concerning the nuclear weapons disarmament, concerning the nuclear security, concerning the non-proliferation. And we do a lot. And we're trying to establish such kind of mechanism which react immediately to all potential what we have in the world, and to correct our activity within the framework of the existing international forums from one side, and with such kind of rather different forums from another side, in order to, first of all, to provide a big impetus that this initiative or such kind of new issues on this particular matter will be focused by many international organizations and many international forums. For Astana Club itself, and during the forthcoming meeting, we are looking and we are planning to pay a great attention to this particular issue concerning on nuclear weapons, concerning on nuclear security, disarmament, non-proliferation, and try to find the way how to balance all these components, all these elements, such kind of nuclear security, to nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, and in order to establish a good path, to find a good path to achieve the world free of nuclear weapons. Thank you very much.
I think that we're at a uniquely opportune moment, because the tragedy, of course, of the pandemic is the number of people who are suffering, the crushing of economies, the changing of our ability to just be with each other. But it does present a very clear message to humanity. All of these $1.9 trillion that the world is spending on military approaches to security cannot advance the real security of our daily life health. It cannot, these huge expenditures cannot address protecting the climate. It is impossible to conceive of the level of cooperation needed to address these very real existential threats to our future while we codify the worst of our fears into nuclear weapons, which create a wall and a barrier to that cooperation. So there will be public pressure to release funds and energy and policies to address the climate, to address public health. And where should those funds come from? They should come from the money being wasted on the nuclear weapons and the intellectual waste of building these armaments, which don't actually provide us security.
Mr. Granov, thank you. Mr. Abusitov, thank you very much. And we are starting our first session, chaired by Mr. James Lindsay. And before we go on, I'd like to tell our participants that an opportunity to engage in conversation is possible if you raise the button with the raise hand or a hand symbol, and that is the option of actually going into the conversation whenever you're not speaking and engaging in a discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Mr. Lindsay, your microphone seems off. Let us turn it on.
Thank you very much. I apologize for the technical difficulties. It is my privilege to moderate this session for the Astana Club. The title of our panel is A World Without Order: How Can We Restore the International Security System? That's certainly a timely topic to tackle. To borrow the title of a recent book by Richard Haas, we confront a world in disarray. The era of American primacy in world affairs, if it ever really existed, has clearly passed. Political and economic power is becoming more widely dispersed around the globe, and competition among the great powers is growing. Meanwhile, in many parts of the world, middle powers compete to dominate their neighbors, and fragile states are consumed by bloody internal conflicts. Alongside these political and geopolitical challenges, we are also seeing the rise of a host of transnational challenges. The most obvious is COVID-19, which has disrupted life as we know it. But we also face challenges like climate change and terrorism, which may increase insecurity within countries as well as between them. These trends raise important questions about where the world order is trending. Are we returning to a bipolar world that pits, say, democratic states against authoritarian states? A multipolar world organized around regional blocs? Some other kind of world order that is even more fragmented and haphazard? These are all really important questions. And with that background, this session is going to be looking at three pressing questions in world politics today. First, what are the main challenges to international security? Second, is it possible to design a system that promotes collective security and takes into account the interests of all? And third, what are the prospects for invigorating institutions and promoting global cooperation that countries can, or that will enable countries to address common problems? We are fortunate to have four distinguished panelists to help us address these questions. Of course, one challenge that arises when you have such an illustrious set of speakers is that we could spend much of our time listing their accomplishments. But in the interest of maximizing time for discussion, and given how well known the speakers are, I'm going to keep their introductions short. I'm going to introduce everyone in alphabetical order. Our first panelist is Tarja Halonen. She served as president of Finland from 2000 to 2012. She was the first woman to hold the post. Among her prior political appointments, she served for 5 years as Finland's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Our second panelist is Hamid Karzai. He became Afghanistan's first popularly elected president in 2004. 3 years after being appointed the country's interim leader, he served as Afghanistan's president until 2014. Most recently, President Karzai has participated in peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Our third panelist is Andrey Kortunov. He is Director General of the Russian International Affairs Council. Dr. Kortunov has written widely and well on Soviet-Russian-US relations, on global security, and on the foreign and domestic policies of the USSR and of Russia. Our fourth panelist is Danilo Türk. He is the president of the Club de Madrid, and he served as president of Slovenia from 2007 to 2012. He was previously a professor of international law, a diplomat, and UN Assistant Secretary General for Political Affairs. We have agreed that each speaker will present for no more than 7 minutes. That will leave us some time for discussion. We will go in alphabetical order. So President Halonen, you have the floor first.
Okay, can you hear me? Fine. So my best greetings to all of you, most of you, the old friends. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic, as terrible as it is, it has demonstrated in very concrete terms that we need to understand security in a more comprehensive way. Our collective security is affected by a wide range of issues, from environmental degradation to human rights violations, health security, and weakening of the global norms and institutions. The risks that threaten us, our lives and our well-being, even the whole existence of the humanity, do not respect state borders. These new threats require new strategies that are based on collaboration and global action. So it is also essential to defend the rules-based international order, which is the backbone to international predictability, security, and stability. So one of our guiding questions for this panel was, it is possible to take into account the interest of all. So my simple answer is, our global common interest is the interest of all. So there is no solution by which an individual state could protect itself from the climate change, for example. Either this planet survives or not. There is not a plan B. So this is a simple truth. So dear friends, so-called old threats, sorry to say, have not disappeared. Actions of an individual country alone can still have a very bad impact to the global security. A threat of nuclear conflict is one unfortunate example. Disarmament has not progressed as we have desired. On the contrary, countries are moving away from arms control systems. So arms race has also accelerated, including nuclear armament. The threat of the nuclear weapons has renewed. New nuclear arms race poses a serious threat to global security. I think that it is often overlooked that there has been more than 2,000 nuclear test explosions by at least 8 countries since 1945. The tests, in particular the atmospheric detonations, have negatively affected the lives and health of millions of people around the globe. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, was agreed already in 1996. And while it has already 168 ratifications, still the treaty has not entered into force. So I'm a member of the CTBT group of eminent persons, and we continue to argue all responsible states to ratify the treaty. So coming back to the new threats, dear friends, for fighting the so-called new threats, individual countries cannot succeed alone. We need wide-ranging cooperation and multi-stakeholder engagement to combat these threats. We need to use all human capacity, women, men, civil society, and the grassroots organizations and international organizations, and United Nations is particular. United Nations, I think, forms the foundation to multilateral collaboration. Yet United Nations and its funds and programs, such as World Health Organization, have been targets of incomprehensible attacks during the pandemic. And this should not be tolerated. I hope that we will get now the more positive atmosphere. We have to remember that member states make a United Nations. At the same time, UN is just as strong as its member states allow or empower it to be. It is not just UN as an organization to take up these challenges. We member states have to align their strategies and funding in the way that supports these efforts. But I don't want to be too pessimistic. There has been also some great successes in recent years. The adoption of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and SDGs themselves in 2015, it was and it's still a remarkable moment. So all nations came together to agree on a new holistic framework which aims for a more prosperous, equal, socially just and ecologically sustainable future for our planet and for its people. It is a framework that guides the work of the global community. So sustainable development is a key also to building peaceful societies. Peace, development, and human rights are 3 sides of the same reality. But we have to remember that in addition to governments, also regional organizations, parliaments, cities, private sector companies, academia, civil society can play an important role in upholding international commitments, including the Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement. So when civil society, the academia and private sector are involved in multilateral efforts, breakthroughs will be hard to reverse. It is important to explore other innovative ways to strengthen multilateralism. So I hope that we can find now during the discussion at least one or two. Collaboration between cities on climate change is an excellent example, but we have already working. Cooperation on regional issues or on particular team can also be powerful. We have a good experiences from cooperation on Baltic Sea matters with our neighboring countries, including Russia. But some of the new formats, I think that they have not respected too much the human rights, democracy, and so on. I hope that I have misunderstood. So some few things more, and then I close my mouth. It is important to have strong nation states, firmly based on rule of law, human rights, and good governance. I think this is a really strong basis also for international cooperation. Democratic nation states are the biggest unit for the individual human beings to participate directly in decision-making. In the same way, we need the participation of all countries in order to tackle threats that affect our countries. Multilateralism builds international politics it's based on democratic principles. It's in the way the continuation for the national states. An effective multilateralism and the United Nations as its platform and a core is the only way to tackle contemporary existential threats. And so lastly, my dear friends, you will be disappointed if I don't say this. It's our common interest to ensure that we involve everyone. For example, studies show that women's participation in peace processes results in more durable and stable peace. Yet women continue to be overlooked, that their participation is considered sometimes to be such a nice addition rather than a necessity. Because I think that excluding women costs both the money and lives. The same goes to all areas of the life: politics, economy, sustainable development, health. The inclusion of women is a key to more prosperous future. I'm very happy that with the sustainable goals, we have agreed in that. Thank you. I'm looking for your participation.
Thank you very much, President Halonen. President Karzai, you have the floor. I think we need to get you unmuted.
All right. Is it okay now?
We can hear you now, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you, sir. Madam President, gentlemen, pleasure to be with you all. And the topic is of immense interest to all of us. Collective security system for the whole world. Well, we don't recall, at least I don't recall, in the recent history of us all, if we ever had a global security system. We did have blocks of security systems, and they interacted and provided some form of global security. But we did have an example in 2001, after the tragedy of September 11, of the whole world getting together and united with the United States and its allies, and then the subsequent intervention in Afghanistan to fight terrorism and extremism. That example did not last for long. That cooperation, unfortunately, did not last for long, though it did not go away completely. So there is that one clear example of the world community getting together for a common cause. It is this that we must have in mind as a purpose for a broader get-together of the world community, or at least the major powers who can impact things for a better world order and security. My experience shows that the impediment to the issues that you discussed and Madam President discussed earlier be it nuclear disarmament, be it effective cooperation on viruses like we have today, the COVID-19, or the issue of extremism and terrorism, religious extremism, let alone the economic issues and the deprivations that we face. The major impediment to a global cooperation or a global order that will bring about such cooperation is increasingly a narrow definition of the national interest. That definition of the national interest brings us focusing on transitory issues. The national interest for the moment does not require one or the other power to focus or to cooperate on an issue that has global significance. One clear example of this is during the competition between the East and the Western blocks of the Soviet Union and the West. Somehow it was decided that the Soviet Union should be confronted by the use of religious extremism. And for that objective, this instrument was found good enough. Nobody thought of the consequences of that. Look at the examples that we have around us of the violence that we face around the world. So in my opinion, as the world is transitioning to a new order, definitely that is the case. And hopefully this new order would be one in which we find ourselves happier. With this multipolar world or, two big powers or whatever the arrangement. Speaking from the point of view of hope as citizens of the world, and from the point of view of the experience that I have dealing with leaders and world affairs, up to the intellectuals and political leaders with a vision, it will be to find common ground between great issues of humankind and the interest of big nations or collectivity of nations at a certain point that we define as the national interest. If we can find a compromise there intellectually and in practical application of that common point, the world will be served better. The world will be a lot more secure. I saw in my own country, Afghanistan, and that's why I'm focusing on this issue today with you, as it relates to our global security or a system that we aspire to. When we had the full cooperation or understanding of major powers with the United States and NATO in Afghanistan, we had a speedy transition to a lot of progress and stability in Afghanistan and in the surrounding region. There was a lot of eye-to-eye seeing in Afghanistan between Iran and the United States. And we spoke to both countries and they understood. And there was a similar arrangement between China and the United States and Russia and the United States. And all of them would be facilitating the improvement of order in Afghanistan. How do we get there is for all of us to debate, and especially for those who know how better to analyze and debate this to come forward. So I hope that we will see more wisdom individually and collectively in handling the issues that we face, and that we separate momentary interests that may be good for that moment for one country or a group of countries from the importance or the necessity of an interest that sooner or later applies to the whole of us in spite of that momentary interest that a nation may have. And I hope that extremism and terrorism that affects all of us, as does the nuclear issues, as does all other issues, will also be handled from the same perspective, that we don't find it for a moment in our interest, and then the next moment not in our interest. That's where we falter, that's where we fail, and that's how we began to suffer again in Afghanistan. So let's hope that is addressed in more global mankind terms, rather than specific interests of nations or group of nations for a specific moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Karzai, for those insights. I'm now going to invite Dr. Kortunov to speak. Andrey, we're going to get you unmuted, and you will have the floor.
Oh, here I am. Well, thank you, Jim. It's really not easy to take the floor after two presidents in a row, and I'll try to comment on what has been said. Definitely, we've just listened to two very rich and very thought-provoking presentations. Let me start with saying that, in my view, we are doomed to live in the situation of security deficit for a long time. It sounds pessimistic, and many believe that probably the world has hit the bottom, and with the election of President Joe Biden, the world will start getting back to a more secure, more predictable system. I think that this is questionable, unfortunately. I hope that optimists are right. But still, I think there are so many security issues which remain unresolved that we should be very cautious and very inventive in our approaches to these. And I think that the tragedy of our times is that we have to deal simultaneously with two very different security agendas. The first agenda is the one that we inherited from the previous century. We have more or less traditional arms race. We have problems related to territorial conflicts. We have proliferation, and we have many other issues which we should have taken care of after the end of the Cold War. We had maybe 20 years, 30 years to address these issues, to come up with appropriate solutions. Unfortunately, this momentum was wasted, and the agenda is back with us, so we'll have to deal with it. But at the same time, we do have a new security agenda, the agenda which belongs to the 21st century. And we can talk about cyber, about artificial intelligence, about migrations, about energy security, about pandemics, like the one that we go through right now. And this is a very different security agenda, but we have to handle the two simultaneously. Of course, ideally, I think we should handle these issues through the United Nations organization and its agencies. Ideally, we should come to a global collective security system. But I don't think it's realistic to envisage such a system anytime soon, primarily because such a system implies that there should be some kind of common vision on the world, common vision on its future, common vision of what is fair and what is not, what is legitimate and what is not legitimate. And unfortunately, we do not have this common vision. And the jury is still in session about the future of liberalism, about the future of liberal democracy versus political authoritarianism, about market versus state, and on many other very fundamental issues, which definitely create obstacles in finding a common denominator of the security system. So I think this is something that will be with us for some time. I'm afraid that we have only entered a rather long process of deglobalization. I think that in years to come, we'll see international trade, international investments, international travel going down, with one potential exception for transborder information exchange. But we are likely to see low economic growth in many countries, a continuous rise of protectionism. It would be great to reverse these trends, but as history tells us, these trends usually acquire momentum, which is hard to reverse. So I think that this coming decade is likely to be a very bumpy road for all of us. So what can we do? I think that each of the two sets of security problems requires its individual approach. When we are talking about the old agenda, about the 20th century agenda, I think definitely the name of the game right now is to cut risks and to reduce costs of inevitable adversarial relationship. We cannot change this adversarial relationship into cooperative quite soon, but in terms of security, it means that we should really focus on confidence building measures. We should focus on more transparency, more information sharing, maybe in terms of nuclear security, it should be de-alerting and a very gradual multilateralization of the bilateral arms control between the United States and the Russian Federation. It's not really spectacular. It's not likely to change the world. It will not lead us to nuclear disarmament or general disarmament, but at least it can make our life a little bit more stable, more predictable, and less insecure. Now, if we are talking about the new agenda, my deep belief is that we should focus on common regimes, which are easier to put together than international agreements, legally binding treaties, or multilateral organizations with a lot of layers of bureaucracies. There is an institutional fatigue in this world, and this fatigue will be with us for some time to go. So we should think about common regimes in areas where we can reach such regimes, like information security, like food security, resource security in general, and other areas which are not saturated by old grievances and old contradictions. Now, finally, my time is running out. Let me just say a few words about multilateralism. I fully agree with the idea that multilateralism is the only solution which might work. However, I think it is fair to say that we have to master multilateralism. Multilateralism works today in very rare cases. And I think that it works mostly between like-minded countries, like, for example, the European Union or ASEAN countries. It also works between mid-size, mid-level countries. However, if we are talking about great powers, multilateralism seldom works, and great powers from the United States to China have not yet mastered multilateralism because they are used to hierarchical international systems. So I think it would be very important to put more emphasis on not just on multilateralism, but multilateral decisions for not like-minded countries, for countries which have different views, different values, and different trajectories of political development. If we are able to raise multilateralism to this level, I think it would be an important accomplishment which will open new horizons for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrey, for what I have to say was a sobering analysis, but I really appreciate the fact that you leavened it with some very specific policy recommendations. Now we're going to go to our fourth panelist, President Türk. You have the floor.
Thank you. And let me start by saying it's a great privilege to be part of this very prestigious panel, and one of the panelists who, well, actually the last in the panel who follows this wealth of wisdom, which we have already heard from the previous speakers, from President Halonen, President Karzai, and Dr. Kortunov. Now, I think that today we all live in an era of uncertainty, and uncertainty often breeds pessimism. And that's quite natural, psychologically and politically. There are no easy solutions for any of the problems that were mentioned this time. But we also have to make an effort to avoid three mistakes. One is to over-rationalize the past, to believe somehow that past has been better, more predictable, better organized. And I think President Karzai told us this very well. The past was complicated and controversial. We must not over-dramatize the present. That's the second requirement. And President Halonen told us that we have to be aware of the existing opportunities, that they are there. I mean, they come as a result of past work. And then we also have to avoid the kind of illusion of taking an oversimplistic view of the future. The future is always likely to be more complicated than the present or the past. Now, I think that these are the kind of things which are more or less psychological, but are quite important in dealing with this world today. And I think Dr. Kortunov has just told us a little bit about the difficulties in managing these two essentially different types of challenges to security. Now, let me, based on all this, try to figure out where I could suggest further thinking in a search for the way forward. Of course, I don't have any prescription, let alone any political proposal, but perhaps a few elements. First, we are now already in the period of a new type of multipolarity. I mean, the old bipolar world is long gone. The new one is developing, it's there. And we haven't really agreed on what kind of multipolarity we live in. I mean, and I think that there will be a need for further discussion on that, because the multipolarity of today includes actors of very different nature and different size, different power. We like to be concerned about the growing tension between United States and China. One talks about Thucydides' trap and a very dangerous development of this critical bilateral relationship. But that's not all. And the space that remains for other powers, big powers and medium powers, is considerable. So the question there is, how do these other powers see that space, and what kind of dynamic they want to pursue? Now, my understanding of this current situation is that we live in a world where competition and cooperation coexist and will develop in parallel in the future. There are no natural enemies in this world, but there are also no forever allies in this world. So there will be a more dynamic development that we have been used to in the past. And if I just think about the recent comprehensive agreement on economic cooperation concluded between ASEAN, China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, we can see that. We see parallel coexisting factors or coexisting features of cooperation and competition. And obviously, zero-sum games are not the name of these games. I mean, there is I would say, a variable sum games of different kinds happening. And of course, this is an emerging system which is difficult to manage. Now, President Karzai earlier on reminded us that, of course, much has to do with national interest, how it is understood and how it is pursued. And he pleaded, and I fully agree with him, national interest should include global common concerns. We in the United Nations used to like to talk about enlightened national interest. So there is a clear need for that. And there is an opportunity to stimulate that understanding to grow. And I think discussions like ours have a lot to do with that. And obviously, we have to think about the normative and institutional frameworks to which both President Halonen and Dr. Kortunov referred in the past. And let me add a few points here. I think that all the areas of potential competition and cooperation can take advantage from some experience that exists in the international normative and institutional system as it has evolved over time. Of course, it is not perfect. Of course, it does not guarantee solutions, and some solutions are not likely to come anytime soon. But we must not underestimate the wealth of experience that does exist, not only in United Nations, also in World Trade Organization, for example. We must not underestimate the convening capacity of these institutions, which can really bring together various actors, and also the legitimacy that comes with that. So, I mean, these are all qualities that can help. There is no automaticity, there is no low-hanging fruit available, but there is an opportunity, and I would like to emphasize that very much. Because whichever problem we take, we can always draw some kind of experience from the past that can help today and in the future. And that is also one element which was not mentioned so far, and that is G20. G20, which has proven itself as a framework for crisis management in the economic financial field in the past. And I think that G20 should be seen and should be stimulated as a crisis manager for the future. Now, how that is done is for a separate discussion, but the opportunity, in my opinion, is there. And that leads me to my concluding remark about multilateralism. Surely, there is a plurality of multilateral frameworks, and none of them guarantees results automatically, but each of them provides an opportunity that can be used. Some of those opportunities will take time. Others cannot wait. For example, if one thinks about global warming, the COP26 in Glasgow at the end of 2021 is around the corner. And interestingly, not only European Union, but also Japan, China, Russia, I believe also in the future United States, have expressed stronger commitments to that. All right, the question then is, what can be done in the remaining 12 months? And this kind of challenges also have to be taken into account because they represent an important part of the overall agenda. Now, these are the kind of thoughts that come to mind after having listened to this very important and very, very thought-provoking discussion so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Türk. I think you provided a nice counterbalance to Andrey's remarks, and I want to thank all the panelists for making my job easier by complying with the limit of 7 minutes of opening remarks. I'd like to pose a question to all of you that really draws on a theme I see emerging from the various remarks, and that the world order is currently changing. We face a very complicated agenda, lots of different challenges. But as one looks at history, it is clear that the great powers, the major powers, have a major say in how that order evolves. But also, and I think President Türk made this point very nicely, even granting that great powers matter more than other countries, there is space for smaller countries to make a difference. So what I would like to ask each of you is to reflect briefly on where you think there might be areas of cooperation among the great powers, but also what advice you would give as former practitioners for smaller powers. How do they navigate the space open to them to make a positive contribution to international security? And we'll go in the order that people made their opening remarks. So President Halonen, you have first crack at the question. Oh, wait, I think we have to get you unmuted. My apologies. I think we're still waiting to get you unmuted. Seems to be the common peril of virtual meetings. Okay, well, we wait to see if...
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can
Fine.
hear you now.
Okay, so the question is that I think that every one of us is underlying also the fact that there are the mega trends in this universe, so that we can try to do our best, and I think that our colleagues there already mentioned, Danilo now as the latest, that we can either try to find what's our common interests or common concerns, and try to find that in which ways we can find new ways to do the collaboration. So I think that the smaller states have been, in a way, somebody could say that it's a laboratory, that it's easier to do in the smaller states, many good issues. But I would say that it's very hard to find any such kind of the great power or even the big state, which would be just in one unit. But if you divide the society in different sectors or regions, you always find also the smaller units. And that's why I think that, for instance, for us, for Europeans, we have sometimes difficulties to understand. If I take a very simple example, that the latest American, when they have the presidential elections, so I had at least the difficulties to explain in my own country that people are not electing the president, but the states, the different states are electing the new president for USA. And so this is perhaps in a way what I think, that there are the more possible size of the units where you can have a different kind of the politics, but then we all together, we in the way we are this global system. And so I think that the new way of thinking this is also that, of course, all the presidents and prime ministers and parliaments are very welcome. But we shouldn't forget that cities and NGOs and business community have been also, for instance, in the time of the President Trump, they have been working very effectively for the climate agreement, because these all make it together in the different national states, the political opinion. But also at the global level, of course, like it was mentioned that we have the United Nations, we have the World Trade Organization, we have G20, but we have also a lot of different kind of organizations which can work together. And now I think that COVID-19 is one of those issues where we can practice, we can train now that how the world would work together in a way limited sector, which have, of course, consequences also in different parts of the society. So in that way, I think that it could be possible, but it's also interesting to notice that, for instance, these great powers, they have not succeeded pretty well in the fight against the COVID-19. And so I think that we could learn from this struggle also something, and there I can add, whether you agree or not, I can add that it seemed to be so that some kind of the feminine know-how in the society has been helpful. Let's take the New Zealand, let's take my own country, or let's take many others, which has worked quite well. It doesn't mean that the men cannot think that, but I mean that the society which understand also the importance of the so-called or soft sectors, which are also very strong ones, it might be a very sound guidance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Halonen. President Karzai, we're going to unmute you, hopefully momentarily.
Okay. Do you hear me now?
Here now.
Wonderful. Well, I greet President Danilo Türk. I'm glad that he's on the panel with us, and greetings to him. Now, on the big power cooperation and also the role that smaller states can play, my view is that eventually it is an interdependent world. Even major powers, great powers, cannot do the whole thing on their own. To take a case against my own presentation of the national interest, it is also the national interest that would dictate cooperation in areas of urgent necessity. So the future to me is one, whatever mode of global order we go to, the future is one in which where competition will have its own place and dependency will dictate its own outcomes. And there's a lifestyle that rich nations and huge nations and powerful nations have. Nobody wants to lose that. That is something that will dictate, hopefully, and I believe it will, all of us towards a greater cooperative environment. Whether that greater cooperative environment is on all the issues, no, but definitely on issues that will eventually impact the greatest interest of mankind, I'm sure leaders will come together to find an answer. Climate change is definitely going to be one issue that the whole of mankind, regardless of the status of countries, will come to cooperate. So I'm hopeful. On the role of small nations, there are two mechanisms for that. There are two mediums for that. One is the international organizations like the United Nations, through which, or through the mechanism that offers, one small nations can bring their issues and can bring their voices. But also, more effectively, there are regional organizations, collectivity of countries together, in which small nations gain a voice, and through the power of those organizations, they present their views. In our own region, Eurasia, there is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, there is the SAARC organization, and the two have joined hands. Now, a country like Afghanistan, or a country like our countries like our neighbors, we have seen that we were able to present a lot of ideas and seek implementation through such organizations. So there is that mechanism available to smaller countries where they can impact things regionally or globally.
Thank you very much, President Karzai. Dr. Kortunov, Andrey, we're going to go to you next. You can just wait till we unmute you. There you go. Oh, Pierce, you've been remuted.
Here I am. I think that, well, there are 2 points that I wanted to make. First of all, I think that in the 21st century, we should redefine our perceptions of what is big and what is small in international relations. We will still have hierarchies, but I think unlike the 20th century or earlier periods of human history, we're likely to see more variable hierarchies. For example, if you ask yourself, what are the superpowers in cell phones today? Of course, it is the United States with its Apple, it is China with its Huawei, but it is also South Korea with its Samsung. So a relatively small country can compete with leaders quite successfully. If you take Canada, it is definitely smaller, not in terms of territory, but in terms of overall international influence than the United States. But if you take specifically the Arctic region and the Arctic Council, Canada is definitely bigger than the United States and more influential there for a variety of reasons. Therefore, I think that definitely this standard approach to what makes a country big or small should be reviewed and revised. But second, what I wanted to say, and it was partially mentioned here, I think that in many cases, initiatives that come from relatively small countries get more credibility than those that we get from bigger states. If you take TPP, for example, some believe that it is an American idea, but it is not an American idea, and this is exactly why it was successful. It was advanced by Singapore and by New Zealand, by small nations, and the United States joined this initiative only at a later stage and then left it, unfortunately. But let me refer also to to Kazakhstan. I think the experience of Kazakhstan as a major player in the nuclear field is very telling. Because if a certain proposal comes from Moscow, definitely it is met with a lot of suspicion, especially by Western partners. They're looking for a catch there. And the other way around, if something comes from Washington, D.C., decision makers in Moscow would say that probably they're trying to do something for their advantage. But some of the ideas that were generated in Kazakhstan turned out to be well received by everybody, because it is difficult to suspect Kazakhstan of some sinister geopolitical ambitions. So I think that definitely small countries have a lot of potential and a lot of potential influence on the future of the international system.
Thank you, Andrey. We're going to go to President Türk next. If we can just wait till he's unmuted. I believe you're now live, Mr. President.
Okay, I'm now unmuted. Well, look, much was said about the possible answers, and I don't really have all that much to add, except that when I was representing a small country in the United Nations as permanent representative, I used to quote very often Jonathan Swift and his Gulliver Travels, where he says somewhere in passing that, well, you know, big powers have to appreciate smaller partners and small states, because that's the way they know that they are big. Because if they didn't have that comparison, they would know that they are big, because they would be all, you know, in the same class. So there is a case for listening to smaller powers, and as was explained, obviously there are positive examples from the past, and I think Kazakhstan is an excellent example. Not that it is small in geographical sense, but it's a country which has come from the very beginning, from the early years of its independence, with bold diplomatic initiative, and has prevailed, and that should be appreciated. Now, the only specific thing that I would like to say at this stage has to do with G20. Now, G20 is an interesting combination, because it is one in a certain sense global. It is related to other multilateral mechanisms, and it is less burdened with procedure and norms than other multilateral organisms, and therefore it should be given special attention. And my specific suggestion here would be, let us all think about what could Italy do next year when it presides the G20. Now, this year is very difficult because of COVID, but next year will be the time of going out of the crisis and figuring out all kinds of new solutions or new avenues. And I think the presidency of a country which doesn't belong to the club of the biggest powers, but is, you know, well connected and has great experience and great diplomacy, could be particularly valuable. And that's all I wanted to suggest at this point.
Thank you very much, President Türk. I want to thank all of the panelists for a rich set of remarks and insights. I'd love to go through another round of questions, but I have promised the organizers of the Astana conference that I would bring us to a close more or less on time. and I believe we have come to an end. If I could just make just one final point, which is I think it is important in the remarks we've heard today, sort of a common theme that we do face very real challenges going forward as individual countries and as a global community, but there are actually real opportunities to make progress on those problems. And that will require work not just of the so-called great powers, and even not solely the actions of middle powers or smaller powers, but to go back to a point that President Halonen made, also civil societies around the world in the ability of grassroots efforts to be able to tackle major problems. And with that, I again want to say thank you to our panelists. It was a wonderful conversation, and I'll now turn it back over to our hosts.
And we're back in the studio here in the Kazakh capital of Nursultan. And before we start our next session, 100 seconds before midnight, strategic timing for resumption of nuclear dialogue, let's watch a video clip about Kazakhstan's anti-nuclear initiatives.
In 2020, the coronavirus pandemic has shown how fragile and interconnected the modern world is. The whole of humanity has clearly recognized its unity in the face of a global threat. Nuclear war has remained a major threat for the past 75 years. Today, civilization is closer to the apocalypse than ever before. The doomsday clock reads 100 seconds before midnight, the closest we have ever been to a nuclear disaster. The global architecture of international agreements regulating nuclear missile weapons is breaking down, posing a critical threat to the entire world. The world is once again on the verge of an uncontrolled nuclear arms race. Such a scenario cannot be allowed to continue. A way out of the situation needs to be found. The people in the land of Kazakhstan have experienced firsthand the horrors and the consequences of nuclear tests. 304,000 square kilometers of affected land. Over 1,300,000 people exposed. At least 450 nuclear tests with a total power exceeding 50 megatons in 40 years. 2,500 times the power of the Hiroshima bombing.
Открытие атомной энергии стало одним из выдающихся достижений науки в 21 веке. Но ее использование в военных целях оказалось величайшим, самым опасным заблуждением в истории человечества.
Kazakhstan has decisively chosen a world free of nuclear weapons. On August the 29th, 1991, Nursultan Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan, issued the historic decree to shut down the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site. Kazakhstan has demonstrated exceptional leadership in nuclear disarmament. Nursultan Nazarbayev has made the bold decision to close the nuclear test site and abandon nuclear weapons. It was a far-sighted step. Since the very first days of independence, struggling for a nuclear-free world has been a top priority for Kazakhstan. The peacekeeping policy of Nursultan Nazarbayev has been recognized by the international community and consolidated Kazakhstan's position as a global leader in the anti-nuclear movement. On August the 29th, 2017, the opening ceremony of the IAEA low-enriched uranium bank in Kazakhstan was held.
Только что мы стали участниками уникального события – церемонии открытия банка низкоогащенного урана МАГАТЭ у нас в Казахстане. Мы собрались в знаменательный день, имеющий особое значение для нашей страны и всего мирового сообщества. Воля народа Казахстана оказалась сильнее холодной войны и, по сути, заставила замолчать полигоны всех остальных ядерных держав.
Kazakhstan has for many years been a steadfast partner of the IAEA in working to prevent nuclear proliferation and advancing peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The personal engagement of President Nazarbayev from the start has contributed greatly to the project. I also express my appreciation for the excellent cooperation of UMP in implementing the facility operator agreement for the services to be provided in connection with the IAEA LEU Bank.
Today, the world is on the verge of a landmark decision. We can slip into the madness of another nuclear arms race, or the world can show the political will to address the critical challenges that are emerging. In November 2019, at the 5th Astana Club meeting, the first president of Kazakhstan, Nursultan Nazarbayev, proposed the creation of a unique platform, the Global Alliance of Leaders for Nuclear Security and a Nuclear Weapon-Free World.
В манифесте «Мир. 21 век», с которым я выступил на одной из сессий Организации Объединенных Наций, отмечал необходимость формирования географии устойчивого мира, последовательным искоренением войны как способа жизнедеятельности и прийти к 50-летнему юбилею Организации Объединенных Наций без ядерного оружия. Задача приобретает особую актуальность с учетом размывания основ международной системы нераспространения, оружия массового уничтожения, а также обострения ситуации вокруг ядерных программ Ирана и Корейской Народно-Демократической Республики. Мы видим, что в мире растет запрос на создание авторитетной глобальной платформы для продвижения повестки ядерного разоружения и нераспространения. С учетом этого считаю необходимым инициировать создание глобального альянса лидеров за безъядерный мир.
The Global Alliance of Leaders will bring together influential politicians, diplomats, and scientists in order to make a tangible contribution to the strengthening of the world's nuclear security. The Alliance's goal is to shape a constructive agenda on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and to mobilize global support for the control of weapons of mass destruction. There will be no winners in a nuclear war. The world cannot allow a nuclear disaster to happen. The joint efforts by the leaders of the global anti-nuclear movement will pave the way to a world free from the threat of nuclear war. Common threats require common action.
And we're starting our next session 100 seconds before midnight, strategic timing for a resumption of global nuclear dialogue. The session will be chaired by the esteemed Angela Kane, the Vice President of the International Institute for Peace. Dr. Kane has served as the Under Secretary General of the UN High Representative for Disarmament Affairs between 2012-2015. Dr. Kane, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And it's a great honor to be here with you and also to chair a panel that has such good friends on it. I really look forward to our discussion. And when you started with the 100 seconds before midnight, of course, the doomsday clock is going to be set again in January. And I really wonder if there is a thought about, is it going to be closer to midnight even then, or is it going to be further away from midnight? It's always a very interesting decision when we see what the outcome is of how it will be determined, what will the timing be. And as we know, arms control has always been bilateral between the United States and Russia and formerly Soviet Union. And these two powers still dominate. And with Chris Ford from the US just recently calling the discussion on arms control nuclear identity politics, and while Ford's counterpart in Moscow, Vladimir Yermakov, said that arms control was outdated. And that really makes us think, where are we now? The frameworks for discussion and negotiation are designed for the realities of the past, with all US-Russian arms control agreements abrogated and only New START, still in effect, and it's a bit on oxygen. We wonder what's going to happen and what President-elect Biden will do. But we need to look at ways to engage with more than just two of the major powers. And the previous panel, those of you who were following it, have shown already that there is a space for action, not only of the biggies, if I can call it that, but also of the medium-sized power and even smaller powers who can make ideas, who can put forward ideas, but also, and we have fortunately also representatives here from civil society, which is very important. We cling to the Non-Proliferation Treaty as what is usually called the gold standard of nuclear non-proliferation, but here the wind has really shifted. No one wants to abandon the NPT, but the dissatisfaction with the lack of progress on Article 6 and the refusal of the nuclear weapon states to commit to implementation of their agreements made by consensus in various NPT RevCons have really created a new reality. And that's the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, which is supported by 2/3 of the membership of the United Nations, and it will enter into force just about 2 months from now, in January 2021. Now, clearly, the TPNW is a thorn in the side of the nuclear weapon states, and the harsh and dismissive statements about it we have heard multiple times. But that is not the way to go forward. The treaty is a reality. It's advancing the norm of a nuclear taboo, and it won't go away by ignoring it, wishing it would disappear, or by urging those states who have signed signed it and ratified it that they should unsign it or unratify it. It just will not happen. There are many issues that are linked to nuclear weapons, the JCPOA, for example. What about nuclear testing and the hoped for entry into force of the CTBT? We have today here a really stellar lineup of a panel to discuss these many burning questions that confront us. But before I turn to the panelists, we have the honor to hear a keynote speech by the first president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev, who will address us in a video.
Уважаемые участники Совета, позвольте сердечнее поприветствовать вас, отдать должное вашей вовлеченности в дело обеспечения мира и глобальной безопасности даже в нынешних сложнейших условиях. Пандемия COVID-19 вызвала беспрецедентный кризис, но в своей истории человечество не раз сталкивалось с вызовами такого уровня и побеждало. Верю, что международное сообщество успешно пройдет и этот стресс-тест, выйдя из него победителем. Дорогие друзья, в этом году мир отметил трагическую дату. 75 лет назад впервые было применено ядерное оружие. С тех пор выросло несколько поколений людей, и катастрофы Хиросимы и Нагасаки стали постепенно забывать. Однако анализ состояния глобальной ядерной архитектуры показывает, что это неправильный, опасный подход. Первое, в уравнении с переменными, кроме ядерной пятерки, добавились страны, де-факто обладающие ядерным оружием, и пороговые государства. Второе, отношения между Россией и США, на которые по-прежнему приходится около 90% совокупного ядерного арсенала, находятся в очень низкой точке. Третье, набирает обороты другой взрывоопасный сюжет – противостояние между Вашингтоном и Пекином. Четвертое, выход США из совместного всеобъемлющего плана действий создал новые препятствия на пути поиска решения как иранского, так и северокорейского ядерных узлов. Пятое. Ведущие державы начали новый виток гонки высокотехнологичных вооружений, в том числе в космосе. Уважаемые участники мероприятия, одна из известных поговорок гласит: некоторые вещи могут завладеть нашим вниманием, но сосредоточьтесь лучше на тех, что завладевает вашим сердцем. Будучи президентом Казахстана, я сознательно посвятил немалую часть своей внешнеполитической деятельности идее достижения мира, свободного от ядерного оружия. Для этого были свои веские причины. Во-первых, Казахстан познал на себе все ужасы испытаний ядерного оружия на Семипалатинском полигоне, от которых пострадало 1,5 миллиона моих сограждан. По моему указу, этот крупнейший в мире ядерный полигон был закрыт 29 августа 1991 года. Это решение стало первым в истории человечества юридическим запретом на проведение ядерных испытаний. Позднее и другие государства закрыли или законсервировали свои полигоны. Таким образом, пример моей страны был поддержан и приобрел глобальный характер. Более того, он проложил путь к принятию в 1996 году договора о всеобъемлющем запрещении ядерных испытаний. По инициативе Казахстана в 2010 году, 29 августа, объявлен ООН Международным днем действий против ядерных испытаний и теперь ежегодно отмечается во всем мире. Во-вторых, обретя независимость, Казахстан добровольно отказался от 4-го по мощности на планете арсенала ядерного оружия. История подтвердила правильность данного шага. Своим смелым примером мы показали, что на пути к прогрессу, процветанию можно двигаться мирным путем. В-третьих, Казахстан стал участником всех международных договоров в сфере ядерного разоружения и нераспространения. В целях признания поощрения заслуг тех, кто объединился со всеми нами в этом благородном порыве, мною учреждена премия за мир без ядерного оружия и глобальную безопасность. В Казахстане также создан банк МАГАТЭ, который выполняет важнейшую роль. Под зонтиком агентства он позволяет любому государству обеспечить свое законное право на развитие мирного атома. Дорогие друзья, вы являетесь известными политиками, авторитетными экспертами, которые, как и я, безоговорочно поддерживают идею стремления к миру без оружия массового уничтожения. Понятно, что этот путь не будет легким, и на нем имеется немало серьезных преград. Но, как говорил Рузвельт, стоит только поверить, что вы можете, и вы уже на полпути к цели. В этой связи я признателен вам за поддержку моей инициативы о создании глобального альянса лидеров за ядерную безопасность и мир, свободный от ядерного оружия. Принимаемые нами сегодня открытые обращения об учреждении и целях альянса являются первым практическим шагом в этом направлении. Я твердо уверен в том, что планета Земля рано или поздно навсегда избавится от ядерного оружия. И главная цель моего манифеста «Мир 21 век» будет достигнута. Благодарю вас за внимание.
Thank you very much to the first president of Kazakhstan setting up his vision and also for implementing this vision with such vigor and energy and power that he has. Thank you very much. Great honor to be here. Now we have, I now look forward to the exchange with the experts that we have here. And again, I said I'm among good friends, and I should say also that two of whom are Nobel Prize laureates, and one of whom is a current member of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. So we're even ennobled, so to say, by their presence here today. And let me now introduce them, our eminent panelists in the order in which they are listed. And each of them has been asked to speak for about 7 minutes, which leaves us some time for discussion, but also to allow for some questions to address to the panelists. And if you have a question to a specific panelist, then I would appreciate if you would identify him or her. Now, the first speaker in this sense is Dr. Mohammed ElBaradei, who was the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency from 1997 until 2009. He had been an IAEA staff member already many years before and held a number of high-level positions. We know that he was born in Cairo and gained a bachelor's degree in law in 1962 at the University of Cairo and a doctorate in international law at the New York University. He began his career in the Egyptian diplomatic service, and he has had many distinctions and many positions before, which I don't all want to enumerate to take away from the time that we've been allotted. So let me now, without further ado, turn over to Dr. ElBaradei. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kane. It's a pleasure again to be with you and with the distinguished panel, friends. As I think President Nazarbayev said, to believe is half the way through. And I think we're all believers, clearly. What we need now is to see how to convert our belief into a plan of action.
My name is Rupert Goodman. I'm the author and
is now
editor.
More risky than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yet, most of the nuclear armed states are frantically modernizing their arsenals. the weapon states seem to be blindsided to few stark realities. The first is that nuclear arms race is not a zero-sum game, and we are all doomed in case of any nuclear conflagration, whether by design or by human fallibility. The second is that nuclear arms control and security architecture is inherently discriminatory, as it is based on the premise of haves and have-nots. Only a privileged few, the nuclear weapon states and their allies, are covered by the doctrine of mutual assured destruction, MAD as it's called. This tilted global security system cannot be sustained indefinitely. The third is that the state facing real or perceived existential threat would most likely be tempted to join the big league and try to acquire the very same weapons the nuclear armed states are relying on. South Asia, the Middle East, and the Korean Peninsula are cases in point. The weapon states are flouting a crucial tenet of the NPT, their obligation to negotiate nuclear disarmament in good faith, as provided in the NPT, and in the world of the International Court of Justice, achieve precise results, nuclear disarmament in all its aspects. Their modernization program and some of their statements and those of their partners, such as, quote, the policy of nuclear deterrence has been essential to keeping the peace for over 70 years, seem to append the entire raison d'etre of the nuclear non-proliferation regime, which is to put an end to the reliance on nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence. This is a significant regression. They seem to be oblivious to the fact that as long as they rely on nuclear weapons, they are holding all non-nuclear weapon states hostages to the risk of nuclear war, irrespective of any negative security guarantees they may provide those states. Our principal challenge today is twofold. First, to preserve and consolidate the non-proliferation aspect of the NPT by ensuring its integrity. To that end, there is a crucial role for the non-proliferation verification, or the IAEA safeguard. A credible and robust verification regime requires an appropriate legal mandate, sufficient financial resources, state-of-the-art technology, as well as impartial inspectors and strong safeguards against outside meddling. In all these areas, we need some improvement. Second, to move on the nuclear disarmament commitment under the NPT, there are several obvious measures that the weapon states could take to show at least some serious commitment to their disarmament obligation. These include clearly bringing CTBT into force after 24 or 25 years, resuming negotiation of a fissile material cutoff treaty, and agreeing to the elimination of the nearly 2,000 tons of weapon usable material in the possession of the nuclear armed states. Another related measure is for all states to agree on a multilateral approach to the sensitive part of the nuclear fuel cycle, uranium enrichment and plutonium separation. The idea was received with enthusiasm when it was introduced in 2003. This resulted in the general offer by Kazakhstan to host an IAEA low-enriched uranium bank that became operational in 2019. It was a welcome development, but regrettably, the core idea of a multilateral approach to the fuel cycle remains dormant ever since. A key task, in my view, is to ensure a wide ratification of the ban treaty by at least the 122 states that voted for its adoption, to consolidate its status as an opinio juris, and hopefully turn it over time into a customary norm of international law. A possible way to break the stalemate in nuclear disarmament negotiation, and President Nazarbayev just mentioned the difficulties in that poisonous environment we are having today. A possible way would be for the nuclear armed states to start negotiating modalities among themselves and with the competent international authority under the Nuclear Ban Treaty for their collective adherence to the treaty. This will give concrete expression to the disarmament obligation made by the 5 weapon states, party to the NPT, and could bring into disarmament process the 4 armed states, not party to the NPT. The US and Russia, who possess over 90 or even 92% of nuclear weapons, should logically take the lead, to be joined later by others. Hopefully, with the new US administration, as and when it will come forward, the remaining nuclear arms control agreement between US and Russia, New START, could be salvaged before it is expiring in a couple of months. We need, in the meantime, to minimize the risk of nuclear conflagration. Technologies to combat cyber attack on command and control systems are essential. Also vital is an alternate command and control system to delay or prevent a so-called prompt launch, where Mr. Putin or Mr. Biden would have less than 10 minutes to respond to a reported nuclear attacks. 10 minutes. We must also put the brakes on the terrifying new technologies, such as the hypersonic delivery systems, nuclear powered missiles, and weapons in space. We should, moreover, in my view, start serious research on an alternative multilateral security system that does not rely on nuclear weapons. What will it look like? What are its basic elements, and how is it going to work? Too little attention is given to this critical issue. We are not short on ideas for a more secure world. It is our mindset that is holding us back. We seem to be stuck in the past, unable to recognize that the world has fundamentally changed and that we must think and act differently. Let me end by paraphrasing the Russell-Einstein Manifesto of 1955 and the Normandy Manifesto of 2019. Shall we put an end to the human race, or shall we renounce war and abolish weapons of mass destruction? Thank you, Andrey.
Thank you very much, Dr. ElBaradei. Those were powerful words that you spoke, but I also appreciate very much that you made some very concrete suggestions as to how to move forward. And we can maybe discuss this and pick them up a little bit later. Now, the nuclear testing issue has been mentioned in the CTBTO already numerous times, both by the first president of Kazakhstan, by yourself, and also by other previous panel speakers. And it now gives me the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lasino Zerbo, who is the executive secretary of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And as you know, in his role, he has succeeded in really cementing the CTBTO's position as the world's center of excellence for nuclear test ban verification. Dr. Zerbo is, of course, known for his energy and passion to advance the entry into force of the CTBT and promote science diplomacy, and also very much boost youth engagement in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. I have the great pleasure to give you the floor.
Merci, Angela. Good to see you again. And it's always a pleasure to have you on the panel. And let me thank my fellow panelists. It's always a pleasure to be a part of such a discussion on the issue of non-proliferation and disarmament. And certainly a pleasure to join Dr. ElBaradei. Long time I haven't seen him, but welcome back. And then to all our friends from the ICAN movement, to Asle, Jonathan Granoff. It's good to be with all of you. And It's a pleasure to be in a meeting of the Astana Club, an organization that has, over the past years, gained prominence as a forward-looking and thought-provoking, I should say, platform for dialogue on the most urgent security measures. The theme of this panel, 100 seconds to midnight, strategic timing for resumption of nuclear dialogue, speaks volumes, as Angela mentioned in introductory remarks. So this year, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists doomsday clock has been set as close as 100 seconds to midnight. But much has been said recently about the crisis of the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament architecture, the demise of the INF Treaty, and the issues with extending the New START Treaty, alongside the fragility of other non-proliferation, disarmament, and arms control agreement, demand collective action. So rethinking disarmament requires a serious understanding of the tenets of the current political or geopolitical landscape. Not only define national interests, heightened power competition, and a zero-sum game logic are challenging the quest for multilateralism. If not checked, these challenges may endanger cooperation and trust among countries. Seen as the worst crisis since World War II in the Western Hemisphere, the COVID-19 pandemic has led to the adoption of measures identical to those in wartime. Historically, major calamity has often changed the course of history, be it in 1815, 1819, or 1945. The question remains, in which direction will the course of history shift this time? As the United Nations turned 75, and then I don't have to say this to somebody like Angela Kane, who has spent most of her life working on this issue and also taking the disarmament issue at the forefront. The trust deficit is increasingly affecting multilateral legal instrument and institution. Unilateralism presses hard against effort to seek long-term and durable solutions. And this is particularly if we are ever to advance our shared objective of a world of peace, security, and prosperity. We need to invest our effort and resources in building the case for multilateralism, neither bilateralism nor trilateralism, but genuine multilateralism that would involve the community of all states. We have to be more inclusive. The good news is that from climate change action to international development to arms control, many of the multilateral structure we need already exist. The more difficult part is making sure they stay protected and nurtured. The challenge today, especially in light of the next year's NPT review conference, is how the international community can come together to rebuild trust and strengthen dialogue over confrontation. How can we strengthen multilateralism to confront global challenges? And how can we reinvigorate the much needed interest in internationally accepted, robust, and verifiable disarmament instrument? For me, or for us at the CTBTO, the solution is twofold. First, we should learn from our past experience. This year marked the 50th anniversary of the entry into force of the NPT. The treaty was concluded amidst the Cold War tensions, and its success was never foreordained. But it was, is, and will remain the gold standard of nuclear non-proliferation. While the next conference, the review conference, may or may not succeed in reaching consensus or measures to strengthen the implementation of the NPT, all is not lost. It is instructive to consider the positive achievement, The NPT remains one of the most adhered to treaties and continue to provide a platform for cooperation, accountability, and goal-oriented actions on nuclear non-proliferation, disarmament, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. The lesson that one can draw from the NPT experience is that regardless of differing political and security interests, the international community can seek and uphold the common interests. My second point is we should ensure that new initiatives complement and strengthen the NPT. The divides, rising tension, and growing distrust among states has touched the disarmament sphere too. The international community has to focus on consensus building and verifiable measures. It should not forget to capitalize on what it already has. Though the CTBT has brought to life after the end of the Cold War, its foundation dates back to the very early years of the atomic age. The importance of nuclear test ban is constraining the arms race and advancing nuclear disarmament, and has been a common thread throughout the history of nuclear policy making. Both top-down diplomatic effort and bottom-up grassroots activism, be it in the United States or Kazakhstan, contributed to the success of the CTBT. I will not come back to its ratification that is pending for the past 25 years and that many of you have mentioned. But I just want to say, as our meeting today is hosted by the Astana Club, let me highlight that Kazakhstan has a special role to play in this effort. Leading by example, Kazakhstan voluntarily renounced to the fourth largest nuclear arsenal in the world. The Polygon, one of the Soviet Union's two major test sites, became a prominent venue for research on the peaceful use of nuclear energy. This experience has given Kazakhstan an added sense of purpose and responsibility, pushing for a total ban on nuclear tests. The key objective as the world enters the new decade is to consider how we can, if I can quote somebody recently, build back better. So to conclude, I want to say that we're coming into challenging time for the CTBT. And I just want to quote some of the calls that I'm getting from my part of the world, the South, the developing world, with the entry into force of the TPNW, to which I congratulate ICAN and all the people who have involved in this process, who have been involved in this process. People are asking me, but Lassina, with the TPNW, where does the CTBT sit or fit? And that's something that we should ask ourselves, and that's one of the biggest challenges that we have to face. So I strongly believe that rethinking disarmament does not necessarily imply dismissing the progress that has been made in the past. On the contrary, rethinking disarmament to me implies capitalizing even more on existing institutions through fresh and innovative approaches. And platforms like the CTBT are building bridges, forging constructive dialogue and meaningful engagement towards the achievement of a world free of nuclear weapons. With uncertainty and insecurity clouding the international political arena, it has become all the more important to advance the treaty, the CTBT, and ensure it enters into force, as mentioned by Dr. ElBaradei just now. So we owe it to the next generation. And that's a generation that I'm focusing on with the CTBT youth group, to bridge that gap between those who have known and faced nuclear testing and those who will hopefully see the hand of nuclear testing and see the hand of nuclear weapon on this planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lassina. That was very inspiring. And I must say that as a member of the group of eminent persons, and also the former president of Finland, Dr. Tarja Halonen, who was also a member, and she spoke very eloquently in the last panel also about the CTBT and bringing it into force. And I know that you've done a tremendous amount to build out the international monitoring stations, to really build a very credible system of surveillance. And it is just very unfortunate that it hasn't entered into force, but I hope that maybe progress will be made. And as you said, we are not looking at changing everything, but rather building on the things that we have. So thank you for that. We now have our third speaker, and as I said, I'm very happy to have two very eminent persons here from civil society. And the first one is Beatrice Fihn, who is the Executive Director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, and after Dr. ElBaradei, who had received with IAEA the Nobel Peace Prize before, Beatrice Fihn accepted it in 2017 on behalf of ICAN and delivered the lecture in Oslo together with one of the Hibaksha, very prominent one. I'm sure she may talk about that. Now, she has over a decade of experience in disarmament diplomacy and civil society mobilization. And let me just share with you one thing which I find very interesting, because every 2 years there's a major conference in Washington organized by the Carnegie Endowment. And the one in two and a half years ago that was like just a couple of months after the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted. And it had a poll, and it said, what do people think? And it's several hundred experts in disarmament and arms control. What did people think how quickly it would enter into force? And there were only 5% who said it would enter into force in the next 4 years. And here we are, and it's already entering into force 2 months from now. So with that, Beatrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's really, really nice to be here, and thank you to all the co-panelists, and of course also the Astana Club. It's a real pleasure to be here and talk to you today. Yeah, I mean, I really feel like I already share so much of the comments and points made by the two previous speakers. I'm going to try to not repeat so much, but really want to echo how I think we share a very common vision and view of where the problem is and see where we need to go. I think one thing that is really clear, and it is worth repeating, is really how the risk of nuclear weapons use is increasing. And we have seen deterioration in relations between nuclear armed states, and increasingly hostile environment, but not just simply that. I think we also have to recognize that the world is changing very drastically. We see emerging technologies. The future of warfare is not, hopefully, in nuclear weapons, but really much in sort of cyber warfare. Lethal autonomous weapons are on the horizon. And these could have devastating impact if combined with nuclear weapons. And it can also really trigger accidents, miscalculations, misunderstandings between nuclear armed states. And in addition to that, I think one of the differences, and also what the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, when they set their doomsday clock, is from now in the Cold War, is that we don't have two blocks constantly looking at each other in this kind of perceived balance that's during the Cold War, but we also have so much regional dynamics. We have more nuclear armed states than ever, 9 of them. We have many of them involved in their own kind of security concerns and dimensions, such as tension between China and India, what we saw earlier this year, India and Pakistan, the United States and Russia, North Korea and the United States. All of these tensions, that means that the risk of something going wrong is on the increase. And I think it's also important to remember that this risk is not just for the nuclear armed states. They might be the ones possessing the weapons, but everyone will be at stake if nuclear war starts. And I think it's really important for representatives of the nuclear armed states to really understand that, because I feel like that's sometimes missing, that nuclear armed states don't really understand that we are at stake here. People from countries far away from the nuclear armed states, in between or in regions that have no nuclear weapons, would still suffer the impact and the humanitarian consequences of this increased risk. If this increased risk leads to the use of nuclear weapons, the humanitarian consequences will be devastating. And we saw that during the impact of nuclear testing that we've seen for a very long time, that's been documented. And I think that I commend the government of Kazakhstan for being really outspoken about this and sharing the impact in Kazakhstan for that. But also, of course, the impact of just one nuclear weapon would be devastating for populations. Mainly targeted a weapon that's targeting civilians. The consequences would spread, would not be limited by borders, will extend over time. We still see today, 75 years since the atomic bombs were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we'll still see impact in Hiroshima and Nagasaki and people suffering for the consequences. And I think a lot of conversations we had also lately shows also that, as in many cases, the impact of these weapons also impact women differently. Women take up more radiation than men do, leading to more cancers in the long term, more diseases, other consequences such as miscarriages, stillborn babies, and devastating things that we also see in nuclear test sites, the long-term impact. And of course, also children. Children are extremely vulnerable to radiation. So I think it's the risks are increasing. We know that the humanitarian consequences are really worse. It really puts the pressure on that we need to act. We have had high tensions. We might have better years ahead of us. But the risk doesn't go away. As long as we keep nuclear weapons, the risks are still there. And I think also we have to recognize that we are not going to ever have a world where everything is perfectly fine and peaceful forever. There will be good times in the world, there will be bad times in the world, and we need to create a system that protects us also in the good times and in the bad times. And I think that that's really where the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons comes in. It has really created a momentum here. It is one of the few really positive developments that have happened these last years. As Setsuko Thurlow said in her acceptance speech of the Nobel Peace Prize, it's a light in dark times. It has really brought momentum, energy, and much needed attention to nuclear weapons by younger generations. And I think this is a really powerful tool that we should be using, even for countries that perhaps might not be prepared to join the treaty right now, should channel that energy and use that to drive further progress on nuclear weapons. And as you said, Angela, the treaty will enter into force very soon, 22nd of January, just very shortly after a new US president will take power. Already looking much better, I think, 2021 than the previous year. And I think that that's really, I just want to touch upon a little bit what will happen when the treaty enters into force. Obviously, when it becomes legally binding for states parties, and again, I want to also recognize the incredible work that Kazakhstan has done on this treaty, being one of the leading countries in this treaty, and being part of bringing the treaty into force. I think one of the key things that we want to work with is to make sure that this has concrete impact, no matter if the nuclear armed states join this treaty or not. This treaty has the first victim assistance and environmental remediation provisions in a treaty on nuclear weapons. And that's really crucial and something we want to work with to make sure that this is not just a paper. This is something that really is going to have a positive impact on the ground, helping real people in real communities that are suffering from the consequences of nuclear weapons, both the use and the testing of nuclear weapons. And also, of course, the countries in this treaty will have a legally binding obligation to work for the universalization of the treaty, Article 12 of the treaty. And this means that we will work with governments to bring even more countries. 50 is obviously just the lowest number that the treaty needed, and we will work to bring more countries on board. It will also have impact on countries and other institutions outside of the treaty. For example, we are working with financial institutions, banks, pension funds, and others to divest from nuclear weapons. We've seen very positive impact on behavior in other treaties, such as the landmines and cluster munitions treaties, based on divestment campaigns. It is already changing conversations and changing perceptions on nuclear weapons, this treaty, and will lead to much more public pressure. We've seen cities like Paris, Berlin, Washington, Los Angeles support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and use city council as the cities are the targets of nuclear weapons, mostly, to use those kind of local governments that people feel maybe more connected to than the federal governments, for example, to really mobilize people in favor of this. But then, of course, also, this will be working as a tool to create a new norm against nuclear weapons and to strengthen the existing norms. I really appreciate Dr. Serbo's comments about this. I think it's particularly important that this treaty builds on past achievements and treaties, and not just in the nuclear field, but also things like the UN Charter, the Geneva Conventions, the bans on bioweapons and chemical weapons, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the nuclear weapon-free zones as well, to really strengthen, because these norms are not to be taken for granted. I think that this is a constantly work in progress, and the treaty can help. And when we've seen this recent setbacks on nuclear weapons, where with huge modernization and increased rhetoric and feels that these arms control instruments that are being dismantled and withdrawn from, I think we need a new mobilizing power, a new kind of attention to raising the bar to make this unacceptable, and to continue to work on that. And I think that each treaty that we have is playing a very key role in this process. There is no, you know, it's interesting to look at international law. It's not very, it doesn't get a lot of media attention. A lot of people are skeptical about its power. It's not so sexy. It doesn't change things immediately like that, but it really builds over time. And we see that when we kind of zoom out and look historically, we see how these treaties and institutions and diplomacy, how drastically modifies behavior and changes the world. And I think we need to have faith in that these treaties are not the ultimate solution that will solve all of our problems, but they build this net of pressure and normative change that will together change behavior. So I'm actually, it might feel like a very dark time for this issue right now, but I'm actually quite positive. I think that we're seeing that there is a lot of these changes these last years have also mobilized people to start thinking about nuclear weapons again. And that's going to be a very positive thing that we're going to keep with us in next year when we start implementing the treaty and making sure that nobody ever tests or uses or produces more nuclear weapons again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and thank you for being positive about this and calling the TPNW a positive development. One doesn't hear that very often. And I must tell you that we talk a lot about climate change, and I always think that it's very important to also link the nuclear weapons issue to climate change. And as you said, in the TPNW, for example, there is not only the victim assistance, but there's the remedial action that is actually for victims of the testing. And there is more interest in it. That's absolutely true. I participated about a month ago. There's a European parliamentarian from France who's very interested in this issue. And basically what it is we need to do when we look at this nuclear testing issue and also the remedial action that might need to be done. So this is definitely something that is going to be much stronger. And again, it will reinforce the norm against nuclear weapons and also nuclear testing, of course, which hasn't happened in a number of years, but that doesn't mean it cannot happen. And as we feared under the still current US president, there was definitely a warning signal there. But we can move on. First of all, we need to move on. And we have the next speaker also from civil society, also someone who has done an awful lot in order to basically obtain the security of a world without nuclear weapons. And that's my good friend, Jonathan Granoff. He is the president of the Global Security Institute. And also, and again, here we have the Nobel Laureate connection. He is the representative to the UN of the World Summits of Nobel Peace Laureates and a senior advisor to the Committee on National Security of the International Law section of the American Bar Association. Sorry, it's a very long word. And he chairs the task force on nuclear non-proliferation. Jonathan, I have the great pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you, Angela. It is an honor to be on this panel with friends and people who are an inspiration to me. And it's also an honor to be in this event convened by Kazakhstan and First President Nazarbayev, which has the most important currency in this issue, which is moral authority backed up by action. Not only having given up an arsenal, but being a leader in creating a nuclear weapons-free zone in Central Asia. So I recall several years ago being with Beatrice in the trusteeship council room at the UN and listening to Russia and the United States criticize the ban treaty on the grounds that it was impairing strategic stability. And we responded that strategic stability is most challenged by modernization of the nuclear arsenals, with new weapons and new missions, the extraordinary expense that's being expended for this process, the incendiary rhetoric amongst the countries, particularly the United States and Russia, and most importantly, the failure to live up to existing promises under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Those are the issues that are impairing strategic stability, not a treaty that is consistent with Article 6 of the NPT calling for negotiations on disarmament and the unanimous opinion of the International Court of Justice. My talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about the NPT, but first I saw in the questions for our panel was what we could expect with a Biden administration. So I'm going to go to the actual platform of the Democratic Party that, interestingly, he ran on this platform, but the press hasn't covered that. It's more concerned with really the circus that's going on in my country, which is shameful and embarrassing, and the whole world is watching appropriately because the outcome affects everybody. But I believe very firmly, knowing the lawyers that are litigating some of these cases, that Vice President Biden is President-elect Biden, and he will be the president. And these are the policies that he on record is committed to: rejoining the World Health Organization, rejoining the Human Rights Commission, the UN Population Fund, and the Paris Agreement, and the JCPOA, and a reinvigoration of diplomacy and respect for law. Specifically, on the issue of nuclear policy, they say that Democrats believe the US has a moral responsibility and national security imperative to prevent the spread of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and eventually secure their elimination. The policy will be that the sole purpose of the nuclear arsenal should be to deter, and I don't like this part, but if necessary, retaliate against a nuclear attack, and we will work to put that belief into practice in consultation with our allies. The Trump administration's proposal to build new nuclear weapons is unnecessary, wasteful, and indefensible. Democrats commit to strengthening the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, maintaining the moratorium on explosive nuclear weapons testing, pushing for the ratification of the UN Arms Trade Treaty and the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, and extending New START. I know Joe Biden, and I know him to be a person of integrity and knowledge of the severity of this issue, even though it was hardly discussed in the debates for the presidency. So I think we're going to have a new era of responsible behavior by the United States. I certainly hope so. Our open call focuses on the NPT as a central aspect of where we need to advocate. My concern is that the very basic principle of all relations amongst nations, and actually all relations amongst people, rests on a Roman adage that international law rests upon: pacta sunt servanda, promises must be kept. This is the premise upon which all legal instruments depend. Failure to honor existing pledges renders entering into new agreements a hollow exercise. The principle that commitments solemnly entered into through the treaty process must be honored remains front and center. That is why our open call emphasizing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is so important and is an organizing principle of our advocacy. Specific commitments have been made to extend the treaty indefinitely in 1995 and in the most important review conferences of the treaty of 2000 and 2010. Now, the nuclear weapon states might argue that these are merely political commitments to fulfill the legal commitment of Article 6 disarmament. But if they fail to live up to those political commitments and fail to offer alternative routes, that's not an example of good faith. Thus far, they have failed to live up to the commitments, and I'll list some of them. My concern is that when words, the currency of treaties, become empty, bullets become verbs. And in the nuclear age, such communication is utterly unacceptable. As a start, they have to come back to a roadmap of fulfilling the commitments that have been made. And some of these are, and this is all but 4 states in the world have agreed to this, including the nuclear weapons states. Efforts to advance entry into force of the Test Ban Treaty, negotiate a treaty to prevent further production of fissile materials for nuclear weapons use, provide assurances to non-nuclear weapon states against threat or use, advance nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East, negotiate START 3, increase reporting and transparency, reduce non-strategic weapons, diminish the role of nuclear weapons in security policies, strengthen verification capacities, and support strengthening and expansion of nuclear weapons-free zones. Well, these are existing promises. And I think that the overarching framework is found in action number 3 of the commitment of the 2010 review. In implementing the unequivocal undertaking by the nuclear weapon states to accomplish the total elimination of their nuclear arsenals, the goal, the nuclear weapon states commit to undertake further efforts to reduce and ultimately eliminate all types of nuclear weapons, deployed and non-deployed, including through unilateral, bilateral, regional, and multilateral measures. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to find a way of coordinating more shoulders to the wheel to get back on track to keeping promises. The ban treaty is a visionary achievement. To say that it undercuts any of these web of treaties that Beatrice mentioned is preposterous. It reinforces them. But what our job is to galvanize the voices and political capacity to move the nuclear weapon states to get back to the rule of law and get back to keeping promises. It was done at the height of the Cold War. We ended up ending the Cold War without catastrophe. We can end the chaos that we're facing today and come into a post-COVID world where the whole world realizes that all of these weapons don't bring security. It is the simple premise that human beings have to work as one human family to save our one planet Earth. And nuclear weapons have no place in a global civilization in which business, culture, art, communication, finance, technology, science are all global. Security has to be global. And again, thank you. And Angela, thank you for the leadership that you exercised when you were in a position of authority at the UN. And you know, the Office of Disarmament Affairs is dramatically underfunded, overworked, with too much responsibility, and yet it continues to be a tuning fork of what needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I like the comparison of the tuning fork. Thank you for that. Let me just come back to one thing, and I thank you, Jonathan, for also looking at what Biden promised on his manifesto. I actually looked at that as well, but I also looked at, and that I find a bit more concerning, and I don't know if anyone later wants to comment on this because we still have one panelist, is that when you look at the transition teams that he has established, it's very interesting to see only 2 experts on disarmament on these transition teams. And there are a lot of names under the various categories. And I find that very much of concern because I am afraid that there isn't enough of the expertise and the push that basically needs to be behind it. But that's for a different discussion. We have one more panelist, and Asle, you have been extremely patient. Thank you very much for that. This is Asle Toje, who is a current member of the Norwegian Nobel Committee. And he was educated at Cambridge University, and he has a long academic career behind him. And he really is an expert on international peace and security. And we last saw each other in person. I think it was at the IPI in New York, and before that, of course, in Norway, when we had this very, very interesting expert meeting, which resulted in a book. But over to you, Asle.
Well, thank you, Angela. It has been very interesting to be able to listen to all of you. And the panelists have provided a rich tapestry for me to point out some highlights. I would like to start by saying that no single issue has been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize more often than nuclear disarmament. I think this goes some way towards reinforcing the emphasis that we in the committee place on this issue. And it goes to the heart of the matter. Who speaks on behalf of humanity? At a time when global leaders are concerned with national interests, defined in the most ridiculous, narrow terms, we find that one of the most pressing dangers to our survival and our future as a species on this planet is frequently treated as a mere afterthought. I thank Granov for pointing out the position of the Biden administration on nuclear disarmament. And I also take to heart the comments made by Dr. Kane that there is a danger that the Biden administration, when it takes office, will find itself with a very crowded agenda, and that this issue might fall to the wayside. And this is part of our obligation as humans of goodwill. And it takes me back to the time just after World War II, when the world was blessed with a generation of leaders who, through their personal experiences, had come to understand the need for a better organized world. Unfortunately, we have not been blessed with such leaders for some time. I think that the initial remarks by Angela Kane was a cold-hearted and a realistic assessment of where we are. The current regime of nuclear disarmament has suffered greatly and is in imminent danger of imploding. I believe that the comments from ElBaradei and his remedy is the right one. I think that the issues that was pointed out were the right ones. And I think that Mr. ElBaradei's speech could serve as a marching order for global leaders. I commend you for pointing this out. And I would also like to stress one of the many good points of Dr. Serbo, the issue of multilateralism. I think that we cannot trust the great powers to resolve this as they did during the Cold War. The trust is just not there. And when we look at the leaders of the great powers, and I'm not going to call anybody out because I don't see any leaders amongst the great powers with the emphasis that we find in the first president of Kazakhstan, Mr. Nursultan Nazarbayev, that is willing to make nuclear disarmament a key priority as government policy. All too often, members such as ourselves, leaders from international organizations and from the civil society, find ourselves speaking to deaf ears because the government leaders are all too often focused on other issues and unwilling to make the sacrifices necessary to put life back into the current regime. Beatrice Fihn pointed out, I think, the reason why this is so urgent. And as Dr. Kane pointed out, my background is in war studies. Friends, we find ourselves at a time of great uncertainty when it comes to conventional weapons. Nobody knows what a future war between a high-intensity war between advanced countries would look like. We don't know what weapon systems would work and what weapon systems will be the battleships of World War II. Very expensive and ultimately not very useful. And I think that in such a situation, if we have leaders that get into a war and they end up losing something that is very close to their heart in this conflict, I think they might find their hand straying towards the nuclear button much more quickly than most of us would want to even consider. But this is why I find this issue so pressing. I think that the issues made by Kazakhstan are hugely important. I think that the country's willingness to act as an interlocutor between the Muslim world and the rest of the world, between Russia and China, between the West and the rest of the world is very important. And we saw that when Kazakhstan was a member of the United Nations Security Council. But frankly, it is the efforts through organizations such as the ban treaty that ICAN, against all odds, managed to push forward that has made the most progress. And I think that we will come to a point where we'll have to make a very cold-hearted assessment of means and ends. The ends we agree on, and we might need to rebuild some of the frameworks. And I think that the way to rebuild is actually to create, like Beatrice Fihn has done. And I think that we can learn much from the efforts of ICAN, especially on the issue of mobilizing the populations and the people of the world, the citizens of this planet. Because as we all know, all around the world, there is such strong support for nuclear disarmament in all countries and all walks of life. The only places where you find a much more dubious support is amongst the great powers, the haves that was referred to in the past. And I think that we cannot expect the haves to deliver upon their promise without prompting. And I think that the sort of prompting that this discussion in some small way carries forth is part of the solution. I think that we will need a multi-tiered approach. I think that for the diplomat and the trained scholar, I think that the agenda laid forth by Mr. ElBaradei is the right one. And I think we can agree on that. But I think for this to create the energy for this agenda to have political will behind it, I do believe that we have much to learn from the mobilization of Beatrice Fihn, but also around the climate issue, where we see an issue is being put and pushed to the front of the agenda through the engagement and activism of people who are not themselves powerful, but who gain powerful voices by speaking on behalf of many and speaking on an issue that is about our very survival on this planet. And before I give the mic back to Angela, I would like to return to this issue. After World War II, a generation of leaders came together to create the institutions for a better organized world, with the aim of preventing a common good for humanity. And I think that our generation will need to do something similar. I don't believe that institutions in themselves should be sustained just because they exist. I think that we need to focus on the results. And I think that we are standing at the parapet of a new age for international organizations. And I think that if we can come together around this agenda that has been outlined with a remarkable degree of coherence from the members of this panel, I think we will be on the right way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asle. Thank you very much. We've had such a rich discussion, but let me just say one thing, and that is also about the Nobel Committee, because you're absolutely right. I reviewed a little bit about how many prizes had gone by the Nobel Committee to disarmament experts. I mean, it's been both political representatives and high-level people who have been very instrumental in pushing the ball forward, so to say, but also to movements. And that has really helped to shine a very bright light on this issue in particular. So I hope you will continue to do that. Now, I am looking with some concern at the clock because we have basically run out of time. I would dearly love to give each of you another chance to react to also what you heard, because there were such good proposals and there was such rich discussion and presentations that you made that I would hate to lose sight of it, but I have to consult our organizers who need to come back to us somehow and tell me whether I can extend for a couple of minutes or 10 minutes or so, or whether I actually need to cut off now.
I believe we can have a discussion. We can have a few moments for discussion, for questions.
Okay, excellent, excellent. What I actually wanted to do, you've seen what the lead questions were, but I think that in addition to what the lead questions that we were given, there were so many other issues that were raised. And just again, I mean, just our last speaker, Asle, you mentioned about, what is it in terms of the conventional weapons? What are we fearing then? Nuclear weapons, conventional weapons, where are we? Dr. ElBaradei talking about a new vision of disarmament, basically to sort of say we need a new vision for security, really. So what I wanted to do is turn it back to you, and maybe each of you can react a little bit to what one or more than one speaker has talked about and see what you think about it. And the other issue that I wanted to bring up, because it's really important, we're always focused on, like, we had this Trump presidency, we're now going to have a Biden presidency who's going to be very preoccupied in bringing the United States and the two sides of it maybe a little bit together. How much oxygen will there be left over to address actually the big burning problems that are global and that need to be addressed at a time of a pandemic where we can't meet, we can't travel. It's very hard to actually communicate in a meaningful way that as we did before. Maybe I can turn it to you first, Dr. ElBaradei.
To put it bluntly, we are taken for a ride by the weapon states. They are not going to move on their own. They need to be pushed. And it is a non-weapon state that they have to push. My feeling is that the ban treaty could be a very important launching pad in terms, and we need to go with full force. Legally, operationally, politically, we need to put the pressure on the weapon state to understand that we cannot continue with the status quo after 50 some years. We also need to put that within the framework of a new world order, a new security order. It is not that we are going just to tell them, get rid of nuclear weapons, but we need to provide them with an alternative vision. How is the world going to be without nuclear weapons? And we need obviously to assure them that they are better off without nuclear weapons than with nuclear weapons. This is a tall order, but we need to start. I fully agree with Asle that mobilization is key. What happened with the climate change is an absolutely instructive. We need to mobilize, particularly the young people, and send the message loud and clear. This is not an acceptable world. This is not an acceptable security or architecture we'd like to live under.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Can I turn to you, Lassina?
Thank you, Angela. I think I can only echo what Dr. ElBaradei said. But if I refer to the CTBT context, I mean, my last statement to state, our state signatory was that this issue of the TPNW has always been divisive in the context of the CTBT, but we're coming to a point where there's no way we can ignore it. With a treaty that is entering into force, it's something that will come, whether we want it or not. in the debate in the CTBT realm. So one thing to do is to see how to handle the situation, how to avoid this perception of division that we have at the CTBT between the South and the North, the nuclear weapon state, or the Western countries, and some of the perception around the TPNW and the CTBT where it stands. And Angela, you said it right in the beginning. It's that perception of no progress in the NPT framework that are led to having the TPNW today where it is, and then to what can be considered as a success from the South pushing for the BAM treaty. So now what we have to do is to see what the world want really to face as we move to the next NPT review conference. If we want success in the next NPT review conference, there are a lot of steps as mentioned by Dr. ElBaradei that need to be taken. And then there's certainly one thing that we can't do is to ignore the TPNW. And that's something that will be a game changer in all the discussion in non-proliferation and disarmament, including in the CTBT.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lucina. Thank you very much. I think one of the issues that also needs to be looked at is possibly the indefinite extension that happened in 1995 of the NPT. So that's, I remember being in a discussion once, and there was someone who was saying, well, this is a very unequal treaty and it's not happening on the nuclear weapon states, etc. And it was pointed out, well, by the time that you agree to the indefinite extension, you can't get out of it anymore. But, you know, that's a little bit of a controversial statement, I would say. But Beatrice, the TPNW, here we go again. And advocacy and pressure, as it was mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I continue to agree with most things everyone is saying here. But I think it's one of the key things that I think that we've done maybe as a mistake in the past is that we fixate on the leaders of the nuclear armed states. We have this obsession with the individuals. It's Trump, it's Putin, it's Kim Jong-un. And, you know, they might be the figureheads of these governments, but they don't decide everything. And it's not like leaders just randomly wake up one day and decide to change things. Even, you know, looking back historically at the Gorbachev and Reagan meeting in Reykjavik during the Cold War, there was huge movement that put them there, that made them come together and do that. It didn't just appear out of their own ideas. So I think it's really important. I think that that's one of the strengths of the TPNW as well, and how it can be useful even for countries who might not feel like they're in a position right now to join the treaty, is to really see that this is changing also who is the focus and who has agency on this issue and who can contribute to change. I think it's really positive to see that, you know, through the treaty, we have actually identified that it's not just the 9 nuclear armed states that's the problem. There's a whole other group of countries that are upholding the system of nuclear weapons, that rely on nuclear weapons, that are prepared to use weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations. And I think that just having that as also part of the problem, not just the 9, but there's more states involved. There's institutions, there's companies, there's financial interest in this. And this is a structure that we can do. And instead of feeling depressed that it's more actors that are the problem, it also opens up for much more possibilities. And it's very hard for an individual to feel like they can have an impact in changing the US president's mind. I can't, it's impossible. But I could have an impact with my country. I can have an impact with my city council. I can have an impact with this community here and that community. And I think that's why it's really, really important. And I think, again, the really key here is to put a human focus on it. And I think that what we've seen with nuclear testing, the reason why we have such a strong ban on nuclear testing, which might not be enforced, but to me, the ban is there on nuclear testing and it works. And it's a very strong norm, and it serves an enormous amount of value in the international community. And the entry into force is just a technical detail almost, like it's there. It's because it has such an impact on human beings. And we've seen that also with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When we put human beings at the center instead of very sterile conversations about number of warheads, strategic stability, deterrence theory, that's when we can make progress as well. So keeping the human at the center is very key.
Well, that's also how it started with the humanitarian initiative starting in 2010. Thank you for that. Jonathan, over to you.
I want to want to follow on what Beatrice pointed out, which is we need a security paradigm on human security. That the first duty of the state is to protect the security of the humans in the state. The state's duty is to the people. It's not the state as a goal in itself. It's to obtain security. And nuclear weapons are the purest, clearer example of the paradox of taking the wrong bus. The more the weapon is improved, the less security is obtained. So the entire venture is flawed from the very beginning of its premise. The idea of pursuing security by threatening the annihilation of humanity is an absolutely absurd approach. Presently, any sane person who follows where we are in history knows a couple of points. One is we're the first generation that has to choose whether we'll be the last. Second, we have an unsustainable relationship with the natural world. We're destroying the viability of the climate of the planet. Third, we know that viruses don't carry passports and that we are one human family. If there is disease and chaos in one place, it will affect everybody everywhere. So the nuclear disarmament movement should be contextualized in the framework of obtaining realistic planetary, global, human security. And I can tell you, I'm a fellow in the World Academy of Arts and Sciences. This is our focus, is to promote the human security agenda. We'll be working with, this is to mainstream human security. Now, the climate movement has the business community on board because they see the possibility of huge profits in the change off of fossil fuel. And the public health community, because of the pandemic, has support because people are immediately affecting the failure of addressing global public health. But the nuclear disarmament movement, we don't have a clear business interest, nor do people see it as immediate. But I think we have to persuade the decision makers and the public that nuclear disarmament is essential for the cooperation needed to obtain a stable climate and global public health. Nuclear disarmament is central to both the health of people and the health of the planet, because neither of those issues can be met at the national security level. The nation state cannot address effectively global public health or the health of the climate. And for that reason, if that reason alone, the moral reason is there, the legal reason is there, and now the practical reason is there. We have history on our side.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I was trying to nudge you to come to an end because we are already talking a little bit too long, and I do want to give a chance also to Asle to weigh in yet again after having listened to everyone.
Well, I think we are in agreement, and we have received our marching orders. I am honored to have shared this panel with you, and it's usually these Zoom panels don't really work all that well. This one worked eminently. Thank you so much, Angela Kane, and thank you so much to the organizers. It's been inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, and let me add to that it is really amazing, and I thank the first president of Kazakhstan and also the government of Kazakhstan to basically make this possible. I mean, to bring us all together. I mean, here we are virtual, but on the other hand, we've also had in-person meetings, and it was mentioned before that Kazakhstan was extremely instrumental when it was also a member of the Security Council. It always focuses on this area. We've had exhibits also of the effects of nuclear testing in the United Nations that I remember very well. So without the support and the strong moral authority, as it was mentioned, that Kazakhstan has in this issue, we wouldn't be sitting around the table. And I found it extremely enriching. And I thank you all for participating, being available for that. And again, with those words of appreciation, with thanks, and thanks for your leadership, I turn it back to the organizers, please.
Dr. Kane, thank you for steering this wonderful and impactful conversation so masterfully. We're back in the studio and we have some remarks from Khairat Abusiyitov to some of the ideas that the panelists have spoken about and an announcement.
And first of all, thank you very much and for giving me floor. And on behalf of the Nursultan Nazarbayev Foundation, I would like just to extend our deep appreciation to all participants of this online conference. And first of all, I would like to extend our deep appreciation to all members of Astana Consultative Council for supporting the initiative of President Nursultan Nazarbayev and for agreement on the last version of the text of the open call. And I would like just to extend my message to all members of the Astana Club consultative group that in the nearest future we are looking to register this document, open call, as a document of United Nations. And after that, so we will be very, very thankful for you if you will send to us some your proposals and your ideas, what we have to do in the nearest future to institutionalize this process, or to establish some mechanisms. We are open for all your proposals because in our pocket we have some plans, and maybe before the next meeting of Astana Club or immediately after, we will provide the first meeting of Global Alliance of Leaders, because we will work together to recruiting to our alliance as much leaders as possible. The next one, I would like just to express my deep appreciation to all speakers, because it was very interesting and very helpful and very useful, very, very substantial, and maybe it will be a good opportunity for us to think about and to do our homework exercise in order to prepare the next Astana Club meeting. And my special thanks to our two moderators for excellent, brilliant job. And I hope that maybe to see all of participants of today's meeting within the framework of our discussions for next year Astana Club Forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Abusiyitov. And with that, we have approached the final part of our conference. And for that, we would like to give the turn for speech to the publisher, international affairs expert, founder of the British Kazakh Society, author of a book about Nursultan Nazarbayev titled Father of the Nation, Man of Peace, A Record of Leadership, Mr. Rupert Goodman, joining us from London. But before we connect with Mr. Goodman, we would like to watch a short video message from him.
My name is Rupert Goodman. I'm the author and editor of this very special book on Nursultan Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan. The book that I have edited is about the leadership qualities of a person who is considered one of the great nation builders to have emerged from Central Asia in the last 100 years. The book charts the achievements and leadership of Nursultan Nazarbayev, the first president, and it covers the entire career, both from a geographic, ideological, and political and diplomatic context, and it sets his leadership in the context of global issues and challenges. Nursultan Nazarbayev is really the architect of the transformation of Kazakhstan from a command economy to a market-led economy. He has increased the standard of living of the people of Kazakhstan. He's established democratic institutions which will continue as part of his legacy. And very importantly, he has attracted trade and investment for the benefit of the country. He has also taken the momentous decision in 1991 following the breakup of the Soviet Union to decommission the former Soviet nuclear silos and indeed close the Polygon test site. This book covers all these aspects, and indeed we've had a huge acclaim for the book worldwide from leaders globally, and we've been lucky enough to have forwards from a number of very senior people from around the world. Kazakhstan has obviously played a major role in the debate over nuclear disarmament, and not only that, it has taken many practical steps itself under the leadership of First President Nursultan Nazarbayev. And this really stems from the decision I've mentioned already, this momentous decision to decommission the nuclear silos and close the test site. Kazakhstan has a very difficult nuclear heritage given what happened before 1991, and this has been addressed in the most humane and intelligent way by the first president. Since that time, he's led the campaign across the world for nuclear disarmament, establishing and ensuring that Kazakhstan has signed many of the key treaties in this field, including the disarmament treaties, and he has advocated for nuclear disarmament at many major global forums, including the United Nations, and a number of Secretary Generals of the United Nations have acclaimed him for the stance he's taken. So Kazakhstan, under the leadership of Nursultan Nazarbayev, has taken a really major role in the nuclear disarmament debate globally, not only as an advocate, but also in terms of the practical steps that it took back in 1991. The book charts the success of Kazakhstan from independence to the present day and analyses the huge contribution of the first president, not only to Kazakhstan, but to some major global issues, particularly in the nuclear disarmament context. Indeed, we've had such acclaim for this book that many academics have suggested that the book should become part of the curriculum for universities and secondary schools throughout Kazakhstan, so they can learn from an independent source the success, achievements and leadership qualities of Nursultan Nazarbayev, the first president. Good evening. It's very nice to be here, and thank you for the introduction. And I must say it's been an extremely inspiring conference, and I've been delighted to be a part of it.
Mr. Goodman, talking of the book is obviously a story of leadership, and how important was for you editing this book, and what is the main message and highlights of the book?
Well, it's been a fascinating task to write this book, and we've really produced it in order to enhance the understanding of someone who really is a very distinguished world leader. I first visited Kazakhstan, as I mentioned, just after independence, and have been witness to the really extraordinary transformation that the country has undergone under the leadership of the first president. And this covers a whole range of areas. I mean, it's moving the economy from a command economy to a market-led apparatus. And there's been a host of other changes, as well as modernizing the economy. There's maintaining peace with other countries, and we've talked about the nuclear, the decision in 1991, the historic decision to renounce the nuclear arsenal. And so the first president has really taken a very holistic approach
and visionary approach to the managing of his country, and it's really a tremendous book to have been involved with.
Mr. Goodman, you just mentioned the renunciation of the world's fourth largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, the decision taken by the first president in 1993. What role do you think this decision played in the history of the nation and for the region at large?
Well, I mean, I think it's been a critical decision, and this has been discussed in our proceedings to date at this convention. He is a champion of a nuclear-free world, and my senses from having written this book is that this is really a heartfelt mission, which is driven by an individual who believes passionately that the terrible experiences that his nation endured in the sphere of nuclear weaponry must now act as a siren warning for the rest of humanity. And this is a message that I think has come out loud and clear from the conference we've just had.
Mr. Goodman, you mentioned coming to Kazakhstan multiple times. What are some of the things that stood out for you from your visit?
Well, I've been absolutely. I've had the honor to visit Kazakhstan on many occasions since independence, including the visit in 2013 when I came with David Cameron, who was then Prime Minister of the UK, and there was a strategic partnership signed with the UK. And since that time, the bilateral relationship really has been on an extremely firm and positive footing.
Thank you, Mr. Goodman, and to all the participants, we'd like to thank you for all the ideas and expertise and your hard work in promoting peace. We would like to welcome our participants for some closing remarks. Please, if you'd like to say anything to finalize our conversations, you're welcome. And while we're actually looking at volunteers here, we'd like to pass the opportunity for some closing remarks to Khairat Abusidov. Mr. Abusidov.
Thank you very much once again to everybody, and it is my understanding that we did a good job. And but nevertheless, as the ending of this our company, if somebody, I would like just to ask, if somebody asked me, collective security architecture, is it possible to take into account the interest of all? I say no. Maybe so for this time being, it's much more appropriate to put the question, is it possible, is it fruitful for this time being, coexistence between two very important concepts of security, cooperative and collective? Because the history of the development of the Second World War show us many episodes and many stories of how the story of the evaluation and of world security system is coming and going on. But nevertheless, I'm totally agree with the President Karzai that two very important elements needs to be understood by everyone on this planet: interdependence and indivisibility. Only on this way, if these two elements will be understood correctly, it means a great, if I may say, a real chance and great chance to start negotiations of the international security system which cover concerns of all parties of this planet. Thank you very much once again.
I would like to thank all the participants, distinguished speakers and honorable guests for the ideas, thoughts and efforts to promote peace. Kazakhstan has experienced firsthand the horrors of nuclear testing. That is why the message from Kazakhstan and its leadership has persistently and continuously been this: international security is jeopardized by the very existence of nuclear weapons. Non-proliferation and arms controls are important, but disarmament may be the hardly attainable, yet arguably the only solution. For cooperation and catastrophe, everyone is at stake. And the only world that is safe for all is the world without nuclear weapons. Good night.